Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Thursday, the 12th of February. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, another investor cuts ties with the global ports giant DP World over the CEO's alleged ties to Jeffrey Epstein as the fallout from the release of documents grows.
The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer calls on Manchester United co-owner Jim Ratcliffe to apologise after he said Britain has been colonised by immigrants.
Plus, a rare and detailed view into the mechanics of an alleged multi-million euro insider deal revealed in the trial of two traders in Paris.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
A UK government-owned investment firm has halted its relationship with global ports giant DP World over the CEO's alleged ties to Jeffrey Epstein. It comes after Canada's second-largest pension fund also suspended future investment plans with DP World. With more, here's Bloomberg's Chris Pitt.
Both firms took the decision after emails released by the US Justice Department and others obtained by Bloomberg News last summer showed that DP World CEO Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem corresponded with Epstein for more than a decade after Epstein's jail sentence in 2008 on charges that included procuring a minor for prostitution. A spokesperson for DP World wasn't immediately available for comment. Meanwhile, neither bin Sulayem nor representatives for DP World responded to repeated requests for comments on a Bloomberg News investigation about the email exchanges. In London, Chris Pitt, Bloomberg Radio.
The latest revelations come as the fallout from the release of the Epstein files continues to reach across governments, companies and universities. US Attorney General Pam Bondi yesterday revealed that there are pending investigations by the US Justice Department related to the probe of the late disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. During a congressional hearing on Wednesday, Bondi said in a response to a question about whether there were any additional Epstein-related prosecutions planned that we have pending investigations in our office, but did not elaborate. And during that same hearing, New York Congressman Jerry Nadler tried to ask Bondi how many men connected with Epstein have been indicted.
How many perpetrators are you even investigating?
First, you showed it. I find it.
How many have you indicted?
Excuse me. I'm going to answer the question.
Answer my question.
No, I'm going to answer the question the way I want to answer the question.
No,
Your
you're
theatrics
answer the
are
question
ridiculous.
the way I asked it.
Chairman Jordan, I'm not going to get in the gutter with these people, but I'm going to answer the question.
How many have you indicted?
The exchange between Nadler and Pam Bondi came as Columbia University said that it admitted a student to its dental school via what it called irregular process that coincided with fundraising solicitations by former faculty and alumni to disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. That revelation came after Bloomberg reported on a years-long chain of communication between Epstein's camp and senior members of the Columbia dental faculty.
The Republican-led US House of Representatives has passed legislation aimed at ending President Trump's tariffs on Canada. The move signals growing anxiety over the White House's economic agenda ahead of midterm election campaigns that are expected to focus on affordability issues. President Trump can still veto the bill, meaning the vote was largely symbolic and a way to get lawmakers on the record regarding their support for tariffs on Canadian goods. Here's our senior US government editor, Derek Wallbank.
These votes sort of represent an increase in political pressure on the president to change course just months before the midterm elections. They also, though, represent a big difficulty for some swing district Republicans whose districts may be heavily affected by tariffs, but who have to face a very real question about whether or not they want to cross the president on his signature issue.
Derek Wallbank was speaking as sources have told Bloomberg President Trump is privately considering quitting the US-Mexico-Canada trade pact that he signed during his first term.
Now, the British Prime Minister has labelled comments on immigration made by Manchester United's co-owner Jim Ratcliffe as offensive and wrong. A spokesperson for Number 10 also called on the billionaire boss of Ineos Chemicals to apologise for the remarks made during an interview with Sky News. During the conversation, Ratcliffe said that the UK couldn't sustain its current population growth.
You can't have an economy with 9 million people on benefits and huge levels of immigrants coming in. I mean, the UK is being colonised. It's costing too much money. It will cause... The UK is being colonised by immigrants, really, isn't it? I mean, the population of the UK was 58 million in 2020. Now it's 70 million.
In that interview with Sky News, Jim Ratcliffe went on to argue that Keir Starmer needs to make difficult decisions to get the UK back on track. Data from the Office for National Statistics estimates the UK population in mid-2025 was 69.4 million, almost 3 million higher than in 2020. Several Manchester United supporters clubs have condemned the comments, as well as the Kick It Out campaign against discrimination in sport.
The leaders of France and Germany are at odds over a Made in Europe push across the EU. This as European leaders are gathering in rural Belgium to discuss their economic challenges. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
We have to preserve and define by design European content. Those were the words of French President Emmanuel Macron to a summit of business leaders as he's urging EU countries to prioritise buying from within the bloc in strategic sectors. But his Made in Europe agenda has a significant opponent. Germany's Chancellor has warned the approach could be too narrow, arguing that European preference rules should only be used as a last resort. Friedrich Merz's remarks at the same event illustrate the divisions going into today's European leaders' retreat on competitiveness. Meanwhile, the UK's Rachel Reeves has appealed for any Made in Europe law to be broadened to include like-minded countries outside the EU. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
WhatsApp says that Russia has tried to fully block its encrypted messaging service in the country. WhatsApp, which is owned by Meta, said in a statement on Wednesday that it's trying to keep more than 100 million Russian users connected. The Russian government is trying to drive the adoption of a new state-sponsored app called Max, modelled on China's WeChat, while it is also trying to choke off access to other foreign-owned services, including Telegram. Those are some of our top stories for you this morning. In terms of the markets, Asian equities have had a hugely impressive start to the year in terms of the rally that we've seen. The Kospi continues that today, up by 2.7%. The Topix also climbing by 0.8%. The Japanese yen strengthening against the dollar. There's a real sort of buy Japan moment, it seems. Meanwhile, AI taking a bite out of more industries, including US real estate names and Dassault Systems yesterday in Europe. Very hot US jobs report yesterday means that traders are pricing in a rate cut from the Fed now in July, so not until then. And a number of earnings out today. AB InBev, Siemens and Mercedes-Benz. Siemens actually raising its outlook, so a sort of validation for Roland Bush's push to reshape the company. Mercedes-Benz expects margins to remain under pressure this year. Those are the markets.
In a moment, more on the latest on how revelations in the Epstein files are reverberating across the corporate world. Plus, a court case in Paris reveals rare insight into the mechanics of an alleged multi-million euro insider trading scheme. But another story that we've been reading first this morning on the question of imitations, copies, counterfeits. Is it flattery or is it frustrating? Felix Salmon has been writing about this for Bloomberg Pursuits. He points to the long tradition of artists copying / being inspired by one another through history and the value that we now place on reproductions that are very old. And he says that as we transition from a century that was dominated by the US to one dominated by China, the world will have to start grappling with its attitude toward copies and fakes. They're far more accepted in Asia than they are necessarily in the West. Perhaps that's the attitude we should be adopting. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm more interested in handbags, I'm sorry, than art. And that apparently if you have fake handbags, that according to professors who've done research into this, luxury knockoffs actually mean that consumers want to spend more on the original, which I hadn't realised.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with having prints of artwork on my walls at home rather than necessarily everything being original either. I mean, if you like the picture, you like the picture, which is sort of the element of it too. Felix always very intellectual in the way that he, of course, looks at these issues as well. He quotes the artist Eric Duringer as well, who notes that the word copy comes from the Latin copia, which is the root of cornucopia. So take from that what you will. You can read Felix's piece at Bloomberg.com. We'll put a link to it in our podcast show notes as well.
Now, Let's bring you more on the fallout from the Epstein files. The UK's development finance bank, British International Investment, has suspended dealings with Dubai logistics giant DP World over alleged ties between the firm's CEO and Jeffrey Epstein. Around the world, politicians and business leaders are having to respond to revelations found in the millions of documents released by the US Justice Department. Joining us now is Harry Wilson, the Bloomberg reporter at the centre of our investigation that first uncovered the extent of Epstein's ties to the UK's former ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson. Harry, good to speak to you. You've also been reporting on the story around DP World this week and those revelations around the chairman and CEO's contacts with Epstein having consequences really far beyond Dubai. Tell us what's happened.
Yes, well, it's been a quite a familiar story now, hasn't it? With all the release of these documents, what we're seeing is a whole host of people around the world, often very wealthy, very influential people, being caught up in this, I guess, ever sort of growing scandal, which is that they in some way have either had links, connections, were close friends, associates of Jeffrey Epstein, and those relationships now are getting exposed in a very public and a very, I guess, sort of damaging way for them at the moment.
Harry, this is part of a deluge of documents released now more than a week ago. Why, just on the mechanics of this, why are we still learning significant new details each day, and should we expect that to continue?
I suppose the answer to that is pretty simple, which is that there's 3.5 million documents that have been released. Quite a few of those documents will be hundreds, maybe thousands of pages long. So we're talking about potentially, I think, probably upwards of tens of millions of pages of information here. And quite simply, just going through the process of sifting through that takes a long time. You know, even with all the technology we have at our fingertips today, that's access to AI systems and such like, it's still a very, very labor-intensive process. And I think that we're probably only, about maybe 5-10% of the way into this. There's just a huge amount of information to go through. Quite often as well, documents require a lot of context. You can see an email that looks pretty innocuous, but it can only reveal its true significance quite often in a wider context of what was happening at the time when the email was sent. And that's just a very labor-intensive, time-consuming process. So my guess is that this is going to go on for at least several more weeks, probably months, and who knows, we could still be a year or so out from this, learning new things from this cache.
Yeah, and some of the allegations are much more serious than others. What has stood out to you most in terms of what has emerged so far?
I think probably what stands out to me, probably what stands out to a lot of our listeners as well, probably is the unguardedness and the sheer, I guess, sort of vulgarity, maybe is the word. But what I think a lot of people are finding surprising is just simply the way in which people communicated so openly about such often terrible things with Jeffrey Epstein. You might have expected, at least by, I guess, sort of the mid sort of 2010s or something, people to be more guarded in their electronic communications. But what we actually see is people sending incredibly, I guess, sort of coarse or unwise communications to and from Epstein. And I think that to me has been a huge surprise that people were, quite openly sending this type of stuff to Epstein, years after he was convicted of soliciting sex from a minor. And I think a lot of other people probably find that very surprising too.
Okay, Harry, thanks so much for joining us. Harry Wilson, there, a reporter who's been covering the Epstein files and indeed broke many of these stories before the deluge of documents that came from the US Justice Department as well. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
Now, the trial of two traders in Paris is offering a rare view into the mechanics of an alleged multi-million euro insider deal. It follows a decade-long investigation into trades that were made before French chemical producer Air Liquide announced plans to acquire American rival Airgas. Our Paris legal reporter Gaspard Sibag joins us now for more. Good to talk to you, Gaspard. What has stood out during this trial?
You know, what was really extraordinary during this trial is that some of the suspects were using what's known as burner phones. They were using these prepaid cell phones that you typically discard to avoid being detected by authorities. But despite these precautions, COP managed to trace their movements and somehow actually wiretap these secret lines. And so in court, there was this moment where the judge actually played the tapes. And so instead of surmising that these traders who had been making millions over the past year, surmising that maybe they'd got a tip from somewhere, well, actually, we were listening to them as they appeared to get leaks from a banker of details about a yet unannounced multi-billion-dollar acquisition. It was really, really quite extraordinary. You could hear the suspects laugh at times. In court, I really sensed unease from the defendants. And what was really quite amazing was the wealth of details that this gang had. They didn't just know the names of the companies that you just cited. They also appeared to gain information about the price the acquirer was going to pay, which was basically a 40% premium. They seemed to know the date the deal was going to be announced. They seemed to know how it was going to be financed. Basically, they kind of seemed to have everything in hand.
One of the unusual characters in this case has been a paintball executive. Can you tell us more about him and how he was embroiled in this?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, you know, beyond these burner phones that I mentioned, what makes cracking insider trading cases very difficult is when you have these unusual intermediaries. You know, it's essentially people that there's no real objective reason to suspect. And that, I believe, was the case in many ways with this paintball executive, Mr. Thomas Seligman, who'd started his career running a hair salon family business for several years and then set up, as you said, a paintball supply firm. He didn't carry any stock trading himself, so, you know, he never raised any red flags with market regulators. But as it seemed to turn out, he was the connector. He was the essential node in this alleged scheme. You know, independently, over the years, he'd met a banker, and then at another occasion, he'd met a solo trader. And thereafter, using these secret lines, he was phoning one to collect information, then calling the other to share what he'd learned. And, you know, that was the person that eventually authorities started tailing. You know, they started to follow what he was doing and then finally managed to place a wiretap on his phone.
So then what was in it for him, since he wasn't himself trading on the intel, allegedly?
That's where it gets really, really quite interesting too. You know, obviously, you can imagine that according to investigators, he wasn't doing this for free. He expected seemingly a kickback on the proceeds, and the authorities alleged that he and his co-conspirators were using these quite roundabout ways to make payments, right? They weren't just like, you know, making a wire transfer like this, you know? And so in one instance, Mr. Seligman had received a Regency period console when he got married several decades earlier, and he was desperately trying to get rid of it in the years preceding this case. And he'd had Christie's auction it several times, but, you know, no one was a buyer. the price kept on dropping and still no one was a buyer. And then one day, actually it was on Christmas Eve, just after a protagonist had made a mint on Airgas, this fellow Seligman got a big wire transfer worth at least 3 times the value of this furniture piece from one of the trader friends who'd made a fortune. You know, this was just one of the alleged kickback schemes. There were other which were seemingly disguised in a distribution contract for paintball ammo. But I do think this Regency one is perhaps the most telling.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.